Vážení diváci Britských listů, dobrý den, vítám vás u dalšího dílu rozhovoru Britských listů. Je s námi Jotamem Bergerem, kterého jsme měli již v minulosti, učitel, který žije ve středním Izraeli, a budeme hovořit o situaci v Izraeli. Mr. Berger, welcome.
Good evening.
And let me start off. We're just a couple of days after Israel has experienced the bloodiest day in its history, after numerous communities in southern Israel were massacred by Hamas militants. What is the atmosphere in Israel right now after this shock and surprise attack that caught the Israeli security establishment off guard?
Well, like you said, it's shocking. It's depressing. It's full of fears and, uncertainty. And it's hard. It's hard. It's hard to see the families. It's hard to hear the stories. It's hard to have hostages and people you don't know what their fate is, what occurred with them, and how are they, and where are they. Talking about children, babies that are now in Gaza, that were hijacked and are now held in Gaza. And you don't know under which conditions they are held. You don't know for how long. There's a great fear that they will grow up in Gaza, that they will spend a major part of their childhood in Gaza. So that's for the bad news. On the other hand, there's a lot of motivation to change the situation and to work together so that will never happen. To have the army do its job and use any kind of weapon or any kind of ability that it has to bring to the end of the Hamas regime that is responsible for all of this. And now we're facing a long time of war, of a full-scale war situation, which hasn't occurred over the last 17 years since the Lebanon war, 17 years ago. And even that wasn't as harsh of a war that now is predicted. I mean, the war that will be is going to be much harder. There's already been 10 times more people, Israeli people, killed compared to that war. So you can understand the scale. In one day, we had 10 times or even more people killed than the last war over its whole course. So that's what we're facing. But we're a strong nation. And, if we don't have ourselves, then we're not going to have anyone. So we're strong and we're standing up together to face this challenge.
What will be the impact of this situation on the Israeli politics and a society in general? And right now we're also in the world news witnessing the bombardment of Gaza that's also described on a scale that's on a totally different, heavier scale than before, and the civilian casualties are mounting inside the Gaza Strip, where the living conditions have been dire already before. Now they're even worse, and many observers are asking whether it is even a realistic thing to actually carry out retaliatory measures against Hamas under such conditions. And whether that will not even bring the population in Gaza into the arms of Hamas in some way. Is there a room for this in assessment of the situation in the atmosphere in which Israel is right now? Do you think?
Well, I think that most Israelis believe that, no matter what are the consequences and no matter what will the future bring, first priority is to get rid of Hamas, is to end this regime. And the logic behind that is that we saw how brutal this organization can be. I mean, we saw there's videos that I don't even want to look at of Hamas just chopping people's heads, executing people. So this reminds of ISIS, techniques or practices. Yeah, this just reminds us of ISIS practices, and it doesn't get any worse than that. So, and further, it reminds us of the Holocaust, because that's how it was. This felt like it's a genocide happening. And, it's murdering people for the sake of murdering people and nothing else. So most Israeli public is not concerned about what's going to happen after the war. And I do think that the government has had a dilemma here, because the government must think of the day after. And if the government goes to fulfilling the Israeli ambition, the public's ambition of getting rid of Hamas, then the army will need to stay in Gaza for quite a long period after the war, which that will also have a high price for Israel. I mean, staying in Gaza, soldiers, against, terrors that are there, that know every corner, and we've had this experience in Lebanon. We've been in Lebanon for many, many years, and every week, sometimes even every day, there was an incident where soldiers were wounded or killed. And that's why eventually we left. So the government is a very strong dilemma about this. What's the day after? Do you stay there, or do you just leave Hamas with its leadership, destroy all of its abilities besides its leadership, and then let them rule and let them rebuild themselves, which can take them years, but eventually they will. We know they will, because history repeats itself. That's their ideology. I must mention that one of the causes that Israel wasn't ready is that Israel had a misconception about the Hamas's intentions. Because the Israel government for many years believed that Hamas eventually wants to build the Gaza Strip. They want to make civilian lives there more and more, fulfilling and better, and they want to help their civilians. So the conceptions was that the Hamas is a terror organization that resists a resistance movement that from time to time wants to clash with Israel, to say, hey, we're here, okay, and we're not gonna let you go, and you cannot forget about us and assume that we're not here. We're gonna clash with you. But eventually that these clashes are limited. That was the conception in Israel. These clashes were limited. And after, there's going to be a ceasefire, then another clash. This conception is now gone. It's collapsed. Because the Hamas, it went, I'm sorry for this phrase, but it went for the jackpot, okay, so to speak. So now Israel understands that there must be a change in the rules of the game. Where is this going to lead? There's a few options. None of them is good, but it's the choice between bad and worse.
I know that in our previous talks we've had together, we were discussing your involvement in the protests against the current or at the moment the previous government of Israel, Netanyahu's far right government. Right now, there's the Netanyahu has invited some parts of the opposition to join the cabinet as well. Some didn't, as Yair Lapid, if I'm correct. And you were of course very critical of Netanyahu's government, and as well as other Israelis involved in the protest movement. What do you think will be how this situation will change the Netanyahu-led policies, which many observers internationally blame for actually worsening the situation in the past year on the West Bank as well as in Gaza?
Mm-hmm. So, first of all, just to clarify what you said, the coalition that was formed is an emergency coalition between Netanyahu and his biggest rival, Benny Gantz. At least according to the polls, they're more or less in the same popularity these days. Previous to the war, I guess, Netanyahu's popularity will descend naturally because of what happened. And this emergency coalition, a part of the agreement between Netanyahu and Gantz and Benjamin Gantz was that the government will not pass any law that does not have to do with the war, with the fight against Hamas. So all of the legislative reform that we've been hearing over the previous months, that's all stopped for now, and that's not gonna continue until the war ends. Once the war ends, according to the agreement between Benny Gantz and Netanyahu, Benny Gantz retires automatically, okay, from the government. So this is a pure emergency government for the war, okay? That's the purpose, the only purpose. It's still hard to determine how is it going to be after. There's a lot of calls saying for Benjamin Netanyahu to resign once the war ends, or even now. It depends who you ask. But on the other hand, even prior to the war, there were many people that called Netanyahu to resign. So, you know, you don't really feel a change in the public atmosphere, at least not considering what people will vote. Okay, you cannot know how next, you know, after the war, how it's going to look like in terms of popularity of the government. I guess that if you ask now, a lot of Netanyahu supporters are going to say, this government messed up. This government did something that is unforgivable. I mean, the fact that it handled the legislative reform and was 100% concentrated only in passing those rules that were supposed to weaken the court, made them ignore everything that's going on in the South. And that's, to many people, even Netanyahu's and his government supporters, that's unforgivable, unforgiven. But, you know, politics, it changes. I mean, it changes, and people get very emotional throughout the war, and the national mood, you know, has its ups and downs on an hourly basis, you know. So it's hard to tell. It's hard for me to determine how it's going to look in a day, in a week, in 2 months, in 3 months. But currently, I have to say, no one is talking about any, you know, changes, you know, Netanyahu resigning or his government resigning. No one is calling, even those who didn't join the emergency coalition said, like Yair Lapid, they said, Yair Lapid is the leader of the opposition. said that he supports this emergency coalition. So now there is full support that might last throughout the war or might not last. You know, that's the thing that might also change. But for now, there is a unification. There is a united nation and united government, united politicians for one purpose, which is putting an end to Hamas regime.
I'm trying to think if there's any possible way to end on a positive note after the images, the massacre from Kfar Azaz can you see a light? I know it's going to sound very idealistic, perhaps, but can you see a light for the future of the conflict ending in some not sure if peaceful way is a way to realistically put it, but in any that direction.
Look, I do believe that in Gaza there are many people. Not only believe, I know that in Gaza there are many people who want to live in peace, and they don't want this. And so far they've been suppressed by the Hamas regime for many years. And these people, in one way or the other, they need to stand up and say, you know, whether it's now or whether it's when the war ends, they need to say, you know, this situation cannot go on. We must change this regime. We must take over and put up a different regime with different goals, with a different attitude towards Israel. And you know, in the West Bank, there's the PLO. And the PLO its policy is to fight Israel is in any way besides violence. Because the head of the PLO, Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, he saw what the violence did to the Palestinian people in the 2002, 2001, 2002 uprising. He saw what it did, and he said, stop, this is not the way. We can fight Israel in the UN, we can fight Israel in the international court. There's many ways that we can be a rival of Israel, but not through violence, because violence will lead us nowhere. Okay, so not that I support the PLO, going to court against Israel, saying Israel committed war crimes or going to do it. Not that I support that, but I do think that if you want to lead a national struggle, oh, and by the way, the PLO recognizes Israel's right to have a country, they recognize a right for self-determination, and they support a two-state solution. So I think if you want to lead a struggle against Israel, you need to stand up, or you say, okay, we want to reach a solution, and we understand that there is no peace, and we have criticism toward Israel, but we will not use the violence for that. We will find a different way to communicate with Israel, and eventually that will. If that voice rises from the West, from Gaza, eventually they will rebuild themselves. They will have a civilian society. They will have an economy that flourishes, and they can find a way to live with us, even if we're not having a peace agreement. And hopefully that we will. Hopefully that we can come to terms and reach an agreement, and we could. Israel could do its compromises, and the Palestinians could do their compromises. But at the first stage is standing up and saying no more. No more of that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.